I never saw his face, the man said softly, but I'd know that voice anywhere. On a fog-heavy night in early November, in a small river city whose courthouse clock had been stuck at 9:17 for as long as anyone could remember, two strangers passed on a narrow stairwell above a deli that never closed. One carried a paper sack that rustled like falling leaves. The other carried a folding cane that tapped 3 times per step. Tap, pause, tap, tap, like a heartbeat trying to stay calm. The man with the cane would later become known, in headlines and objections and whispered hallway briefings, as the silent witness. He was not silent by choice. He simply understood that when vision is taken, every word costs something to say. His name was Mateo Alvarez, 41, blind since a childhood optic nerve disease, a piano tuner by trade, and a meticulous collector of sound. A mind made for frequencies, timbres, the quirks of a throat clearing, or a sibilant that went on 1 millisecond too long. He could tell a cheap ceiling fan from an expensive one by the hum in G-sharp. He could tell when a neon sign was failing because the buzz slipped into a wavering B-flat. That night, the deli's compressor sang its tired E, the stairwell light clicked once and failed, and a voice, mid-tenor, pinched on vowels with a labial pop on P's, whispered behind him, "Keep walking." 2 floors up, in apartment 3B, the door was ajar and the air smelled of citrus cleaner and tulips, fake plastic flowers that somehow still held the faint factory scent. Mateo's friend, the tenant, was Lila Tran, 29, a grad student who babysat his niece and left him long messages that started with a joke and ended with a recipe. The voice, calm, with a faint Atlantic trace, shoved him forward and he stumbled against the doorframe, caught himself on the bristles of the tulip display, and heard Lila say, strangled and hoarse, "Please." He heard 3 things next that would etch into him like staff lines into a score. First, a zipper, metal, not plastic, pulled halfway and stuck. An impatient tug, then the slider tapping a tooth. Second, a phone, older model, the haptic buzz triple tapping on a tabletop. Third, the voice again. "This didn't have to happen, Lil." The vowel in happen flattened. The L in Lil softened, like the speaker had practiced saying it and never made it right. Mateo did as he was told. He backed down the stairs, called 911 from the deli counter, and waited with both hands around a paper cup of bad coffee until the siren's stitch blew into the fog. When officers and EMTs pushed past him, he caught one more trace, a sneaker sole squeaking, the high, dry squeak of worn rubber on old linoleum, followed by a door slam that didn't match the building. It sounded like a car, a sedan, with weather stripping coming loose, so the latch made a doubled click. By midnight, Lila was gone. The coroner pronounced her beyond help on the faded parquet of 3B. There were bruises that told a story nobody deserved. There were fingerprints where they shouldn't be, and none where they should. There were 2 mugs in the sink, one with lipstick, one with a ring of coffee dark as oil. According to the call log, Lila had missed 2 calls at 10:36 p.m., then answered one at 10:41 that lasted 94 seconds. The deli's grainy exterior camera caught only a figure in a hood crossing the street at 10:53, body turned from the lens, and a sedan door closing with that doubled click. The detectives did the thing detectives do, canvassing the building, bagging the tulips, swabbing the mugs, checking the neighbor's Ring doorbell that had been, of course, offline for days. Then inevitably, someone asked the question, what did the blind man hear? When they sat Mateo in interview 2, he had already replayed the voice 100 times. He could mark the consonants in his head. He could hear the oddness, the way the speaker shaped Lil, the way the P's popped, the nasal squeeze that wasn't a cold. It was habit. He asked for quiet and got fluorescent hum, chair creak, and impatience. At last he said, "I can't tell you who he is, but if he speaks, I can tell you if it's him." News moved faster than grief. Before sunrise, the case of the silent witness hit the local feeds, a phrase that would travel farther than the county line and turn into segments that made people angry at the right things and the wrong ones. The detectives, Ruiz and Kaminsky, had a short list by noon. Former boyfriend, lab mate with a grudge over a research data set, landlord with a history of cutting corners, and a shadow category called miscellaneous. They needed a break, and what they had was a voice in the dark and an expert who hadn't asked to be one. Ruiz brought in recordings from the deli, a voicemail Lila left for the night clerk, two argument snippets from couples fighting over meatball subs, and one delivery driver who hummed along to a pop song in a high, wavering falsetto. None matched. Kaminsky, more methodical, pulled academic conference videos where Lila had asked questions at microphones. She triangulated who she knew. One name rose twice. Aaron Pike, 33, a research tech with a reputation for tight budgets and tight smiles, who had texted Lila 6 times after 10 p.m. the week before. Need to talk. Urgent. Please. The text had an oddly formal tone, like someone writing a work email in a panic. They interviewed Pike on November 12th in a glass-walled room where every whisper echoed. He was calm, then defensive, then offended. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for water and a minute to check his phone. When he spoke, Mateo, seated behind the glass with headphones, closed his eyes. The vowel in happen flattened, just a touch. The P's were clean. The L in Lila, when he said it, came out too crisp, someone who'd practiced getting it right. Mateo waited until Pike said, "This didn't have to happen," referring to the department's witch hunt. 4 words, and he felt his skin rise with the memory of the stairwell. But the law does not run on goosebumps. Ruiz called the county attorney, who called the state's office, and the emails began. Voice identification is admissible, but fraught. Juries weight it too heavily. Ear witness testimony suffers from the same problems as eyewitness identification, but with fewer procedural safeguards. Federal rule analogs treat it as a matter of authentication, with ample room for cross-examination. In other countries, bench books warn juries to treat it with special caution. Experts wrote articles about how easily voices fool us, how stress changes what we remember, and how recording conditions can twist. The cautionary tones were not unkind. They were earned. So they built the rest of the case like scaffolding around a fragile statue. The zipper? The lab matched the half-tooth tap to a specific brand and run, an older YKK metal coil slider used on a model of work jacket commonly sold at Hardee's, the local outfitter, in 2017. The receipt records from Pike's company card showed a purchase of that jacket, size large, in November 2018. It proved nothing. It was a thread. The sedan door? An automotive forensic consultant listened to the Delicam audio, filtered the city hum, and found the doubled click likely matched a worn latch on a mid-2000s sedan, possibly a silver Altima or Camry, based on door resonance curves he kept like a record collector's box of 45s. Pike's car was a 2007 gray Camry, with a weather strip issue documented in a service ticket 2 months before. Another thread, but a visible one. And then the phone. The 1041 call that lasted 94 seconds came from a burner line purchased at a drugstore 2 towns over. Cash, no records. But the tower pings showed a path consistent with someone driving from the North Campus labs toward Lila's apartment at 10:30. Cameras on the bypass caught a gray sedan at 10:37. Too far to read a plate. Close enough to feel like the right ghost. They brought Mateo to a controlled voice lineup on November 20th. 6 male speakers, matched on age range and regional accent, each reading the same neutral passage. Then the phrase, "This didn't have to happen, Lil." The forensic audio specialist randomized the order, masked room acoustics with pink noise, and kept volume levels within a decibel. Mateo listened once, twice, 3 times. On the 3rd pass, he asked for the phrase again. He circled speaker 4. He didn't say Pike. He said 4 holds his vowels like a fist. Corroboration arrived not with a bang, but with a scuff, the sneaker squeak. The CSU pulled a faint residue from the linoleum using a tape lift method that captured microparticulates in the scuff trail. The lab found trace silica and a rare compound used in the outsole of a short-run factory batch of budget sneakers sold under a house brand at a discount chain 2 summers ago. It was a miracle of forensics or a lucky break or both. Pike's closet offered 4 pairs of shoes. One, a scuffed house brand sneaker, matched the compound and had a wear pattern consistent with the stair tread. More scaffolding. By December, the state sought an indictment. One count of second-degree murder, one count of witness intimidation for forcing Mateo down those steps, and a grab bag of lesser charges. The indictment hearing felt like theater and math. The prosecutors recited dates and times, detectives narrated photographs, and finally, as the room settled into a hum, they played the lineup audio. And there it was, the same sentence, in 6 voices, one of them a little too careful around the P in happen. The defense strategy crystallized. They filed motions to exclude the ear witness identification, citing the research. Non-expert voice identifications are vulnerable to error. Suggestive procedures contaminate outcomes. Stress and duration degrade memory. Juries overvalue confidence. They cited bench guidance that juries must be told to use caution with voice IDs. They cited case law where courts trimmed back such evidence or demanded strong corroboration. Their expert, a linguist, described how vowel shaping can be mimicked, how context primes perception. In short, the human ear is not a fingerprint. The court struck a middle path. The identification would come in, but only with a special cautionary instruction, and only alongside the corroborating physical evidence. The lineup procedures were documented. The phrases were neutral and repeated across speakers. The blind witness had not been exposed to the defendant's voice before the lineup, except in interview context, separated by time and shielded by glass. The judge quoted from a bench book, "Treat voice identification with special caution, weigh the circumstances, and do not convict on voice alone." Then with a rap of the gavel, the case stepped into the light. This is the juncture where cases have collapsed under the weight of our certainty. Audio memory is fickle. Stress warps what is stored and retrieved. Courts have warned that ear witness identification should be tethered to corroboration, not left to carry the load alone. That warning is wisdom, not cynicism. Trials hinge on moments that feel small and rearrange everything. In the second week, after the lab analysts and the automotive consultant and the sneaker chemist, the defense called their linguist. He was persuasive, with slides that showed spectrograms like rainstorms. He explained formants and nasality and the ways stress shifts articulation, why memory deceives. He was right about the science, and he smiled in the direction of the jury like a teacher who loves teaching. Then he played a trick. He played the same sentence in 2 voices and asked the jury to guess if they were the same. Most hands went up for same. They were not. His point landed with a clean thud. On cross, the prosecutor did something unexpected. She asked the linguist to stand near the courtroom door and repeat a line into the hallway while a white noise machine ran. He did. The words came back muffled. She then asked him to say the name Lil. He did, and a trace of his own accent sneaked out on the L, softened without him noticing. She thanked him and sat. No theatrics, just a reminder that voices carry habits like fingerprints carry whirls. Not perfect, not unique, but telling when combined with context. And then came Mateo. He walked the lane to the witness box with the tap. Pause, tap, tap that had become a kind of metronome for this case. The oath was simple. The room stilled. He did not point. He would not have, even if asked. He told the story of that night in sentences that felt like held breath. He did not embellish. He described the zipper, the tulips, the phone's haptic buzz, the sneaker squeak, the doubled click of a tired car door. He described the sentence as he heard it. This didn't have to happen, Lil. And then he did something that shifted the trial's gravity. He said, I am not saying this man is guilty because of his voice. I am saying that in that stairwell, the voice was the same as speaker 4. The judge read the caution. The jury nodded. The prosecutor tied the strands. The jacket receipt that matched the old zipper. The service ticket for the Camry's door latch. The sneaker outsole chemistry. The burner phone path. The gray sedan on the bypass. The text messages that started polite and ended pleading. The timeline that tightened like a noose without drama. The defense hammered the gaps. No DNA beyond what could be explained by prior contact. No clean facial identification. No confession. Reasonable doubt, they said, is a chorus, and each of these notes is off. The twist arrived in rebuttal, and it was painfully human. The prosecution called a witness not on the original list. A neighbor 2 floors down, a retiree who collected wind chimes and complained about kids on skateboards. She had not come forward earlier because she thought the sound she heard was nothing. But as she watched the trial, she remembered. On the night of the murder, after 11 p.m., she heard a man in the stairwell mutter, every time under his breath, with a pop on the P, and then a zipper stuttered. It was a small echo of the same habit, unprompted, from a source whose life contained no expert opinions. The defense objected. The judge limited the testimony to timing and content, not identity. But the words landed every time. The jury asked for the lineup again. They asked for the service ticket. They asked for the caution instruction printed. They deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath with Mateo. The clerk read the verdict. Guilty on second-degree murder. Guilty on witness intimidation. The foreperson did not look at the defendant, who stared at the table as if reading something written there only he could see. The judge polled the jurors. Each said yes. The sentence came later. 28 years, a number that meant different things to different people. In the hallway, reporters asked Mateo if he felt justice. He paused. I feel, he said, that I was heard. And that Lila was too. In the months after the verdict, the case became a citation, not for its drama, but for its restraint. Continuing legal education panels used it to discuss how ear witness evidence can be admitted with special caution, tethered to corroboration, bracketed by instructions that remind jurors that hearing, like seeing, can mislead. Policy groups revisited guidelines, better voice lineups, standardized phrases, neutral conditions, limits on exposure prior to identification, explicit jury instructions. The journals updated their footnotes. The bench books added a paragraph. The goal was not to anoint voice as a new kind of certainty, but to recognize its narrow, careful use. For Mateo, the aftermath was quieter. He returned to pianos, to the felt hammers and the strings that taught him patience. He attended Lila's memorial and sat with her parents, who brought tulips that smelled like nothing and yet still meant so much. He kept replaying the ethical question that won't fit neatly into a verdict form. When a system depends on human senses that are flawed, how much weight should any one person's perception carry? The answer lives in caution, in corroboration, and in humility about what it means to witness.
Don't forget to subscribe to Real Mystery Reports for more strange, dark, and profoundly human stories. New true mysteries every day.